Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much for tuning in. Lots to talk about in this live stream. I could have done a video on Kiko Sanchez Flores being sacked by Watford, but at the end of the day, he's only in charge for 85 days. Watford seem to have, I don't know what direction they're taking. They seem to do this a lot. They go through managers regularly. And it'd be pretty pointless me doing a video on Watford right now until we figure out who replaces Flores at Watford. And then we look at the managerial history, get the whiteboard out, and try and get the set all set up and go through the whiteboard and do a proper in-depth video. There's a lot to look at with Watford. But 85 days in, he's sacked. That's not the shortest managerial term in the Premier League, but that was his second stint. Watford are still struggling in the Premier League, so we'll see what happens from there. Arsenal with Unai Emery, as I said with the video I did the other night, long-term decline at that club. Very similar to Man United, you could see parallels where they've had a long period of stability and success with a manager. He then leaves, and then what goes on from there. You've got to look at the board, the ownership, and the culture of that club. Transfer policy, youth policy. That's a whole load of things to look at with Arsenal. We can look into that. Spurs sacking Pochettino, lack of success. Yeah, very stable club. No problem. No trophies to show for their stability. A new stadium with an empty trophy cabinet. So they spent a lot of money on the stadium. Big investment. Obviously, the NFL come and play a couple of games a year, but because the stadium was late, they're behind in paying it back. Lots of overlay there. Lack of squad investment. Mourinho comes in. We'll see what happens with Mourinho. He's had a positive start, but he's only had a couple of games, really. It'd be interesting to see what they do in the transfer window. It'd be interesting to see what Arsenal do in the transfer window. It'd be interesting what Watford do in the transfer window. Marco Silva at Everton, former Watford manager, obviously. His job is probably the next one to go. If we're looking at things, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, he'll probably be the next after that. In the space of a few days, we've had 3 managers sacked and 2 more on the chopping block. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of football anymore. It's just getting stupid now. The managerial turnaround and the merry-go-round, and some managers been given less than 3 months in which to make an impact before being sacked again. It makes no sense. They have to start looking at this in some way, because football, for some reason, or soccer, depending on where you are in the world, doesn't really have a universal salary cap system across leagues. There's no spending cap, there's no salary cap, so the costs are astronomical. Very few clubs actually are in healthy financial states. A lot of them have a lot of debt attached to the clubs. So if they were a standalone business, a lot of them would have administrators in and debt collectors and bailiffs and all sorts, and would be on their knees. We've seen clubs go out of business regularly. Lots of financial uncertainty within the sport. So we'll see what happens there. In the NHL, we've seen a lot of scandal in the last week or so. Mike Babcock getting sacked by the Maple Leafs. Bill Peters resigning from the Calgary Flames due to racism and assault allegations. And a lot of oohing and ahhing there about the culture within NHL and ice hockey dressing rooms in general, and the culture within the sport and racism within the sport. So that's a big story going on at the moment. And there's a lot of questions to ask about that. There's a lot of questions to ask about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Don Cherry, obviously, if you follow the NHL Hockey Night in Canada, him being sacked by Sportsnet and Coach's Corner after making some vague racial derogatory comments over the remembrance period. So there's been a lot going on in ice hockey about the culture of that sport and racism and what is and isn't acceptable, and a huge debate in ice hockey. Obviously, we're coming into the festive period as well. This doesn't mean sport stops. It just means in some sports there's a real big fixture list, lots of fixtures taking place, and other sports do tend to shut down over winter. So that's an interesting one. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over this next month or so. And a lot of managers and players do get concerned about fixture congestion. They raise concerns about player welfare at this time. Fans raise concerns about the travel costs and travel arrangements at this time of the year. So there's a lot to think about in that aspect as well. So keep your eyes peeled for a lot of injuries in a lot of sports. A lot of players going out injured, especially in football. Lots of injuries, whole host of other things as well. So that's an interesting side point. But apart from that, yeah, it's a couple of sports having some real big headlines. I have been asked to look at the Great Britain Lions tour in the rugby league and how it was a complete and utter disaster. Then that raises a lot of questions about the health of rugby league as a sport and the direction the sport is taking, not only in Europe and North America with the Super League structure, but also in the NRL as well. There are concerns about finances, the international test calendar and selection rules for your country, which are a little bit of a laughing stock, if I'm brutally honest, because you can represent multiple nations. Just look at Fafita or Sully Bill Williams, Blake Austin. I could just to name a couple who have been recently. What nation will they play for? That's an interesting one. So there needs to be a shift in rugby league, I think. We've had a lot of negative stories coming out of rugby league in the last few years with player misbehaviour. And again, culture and what is not is and isn't acceptable. The Israel Folau saga continues to rumble on in rugby union in Australia, and that continues to damage the image of the sport. He's continuing with his attack on certain members of society, predominantly the LGBT community, and his constant attacks on that minority. So, the Israel Folau saga is still rumbling on. It's still continuing. It's still having a detrimental impact on in general Australian sport. But if I can start with the football, I don't know what Tottenham will do now with Mourinho, how much they're going to give him to spend in the transfer window. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how much he is given to spend and what his kind of transfer targets are. And the Eriksen situation, will he actually stay at the club or will he be moved on? That is an interesting thought to see what they do in the transfer window. Arsenal, Freddie Ljungberg is obviously in temporary charge. He's obviously going to put his hat in the ring to be permanent manager. We'll have to see how results, how they change, if there's any positive change in results at Arsenal. Ljungberg, I think, could be the right kind of character for the job. However, I think Arsenal lack that bit of spite in midfield, if for a way of putting it, or that kind of sandpaper. They seem to be a very soft-core team where when things start going wrong, they fall apart quite quickly. And we have to have a look to see how Ljungberg does. But the big question has to be with ownership and the board and the direction the club is taking. Transfer policy and youth policy and I think the club's culture is a big talking point. The direction the club is taking. They have been stagnating for a long time and declining for a long time, even with Wenger in charge. Yes, he won more 3 FA Cups towards the end of his tenure over the last couple of years. But you have to look at the entire period Wenger was in charge. The first half of Wenger's reign, very successful, lots of trophies, very competitive team. Second half, not as competitive. Only 3 trophies in 10 years. So while it was a very stable period for the club, and he always got them European qualification, apart from that last season, he didn't get Champions League or Europa League. Very stable club, very consistent. They couldn't take that next step and bounce back and win a Premier League. They couldn't quite get to the later stages of Champions Leagues at this point. There were some heavy defeats in there. The 8-2 against Man United really stands out for me. So we'll have to see what happens with Ljungberg if he is on a short-term interim basis, if they have got a replacement lineup like Tottenham did with Pochettino. Within a few hours, they brought Mourinho in. So it seems Arsenal may actually stick with Ljungberg. I think he could actually, if he gets a good couple of results and then the performances improve, because it appears that the players had stopped listening to Emre quite some time ago and were going to Ljungberg earlier on this season. I think Ljungberg could have the respect of the players, and I think the players will have a big impact on any decision when it comes to a permanent appointment. The Women's Super League, to be honest, I did enjoy the Women's World Cup. I think that was a pretty decent advert for the women's game. I will say this. You can't force people to watch a product that isn't very good, and the unbalancing there of a 10-0 scoreline sums up the issue. A lot of people, there's a big drive to get women's participation up, and that's all well and good. But a lot of it's a tick box exercise. And while I am a big fan of women's sport and I do support it, young girls and women have to like it in the first place. You can't just force it upon the general population because that will create resistance in what you're trying to do. And I'm seeing a lot of these adverts trying to bang the drum of, oh, we've got to have women's games at the Emirates, women's games at the Etihad, women's games at Old Trafford and Wembley. But if those stadiums are going to be pretty sparsely filled, it's a bad advert. I think what you've got to do is build the grassroots, build the infrastructure, and actually try and get people participating at lower levels. And that's, I think, where we're losing track here. I think they overdid it with a lot of women's sports. So they just shoved it down our throats. And while I am a big supporter of women's sport, I think that's the wrong way to do it. If there is an interest there, they will play. You can't just enforce the agenda upon people. It creates resistance to what you're trying to do. You have to not necessarily drip feed it, but you have to see firstly what the interest is within the societal group that you're trying to reach out to. And if they want to play, they want to play. But this is the problem with the Women's Super League. The rules they put in place for clubs to exist, they have to have a youth system. They have to have things like that. I think that's an absolute joke of a scoreline. You don't get many of those scorelines in top flight men's football in leagues. Even if a team is struggling, you don't get many one-sided scorelines like that. It's a pity the Arsenal men's team can't do that, isn't it? But this is the issue. There's a couple of teams that are very, very solid, and most of them aren't very good. So women's sport is a big topic. It has been for a couple of years. There does seem to be a media agenda as well. And while I get women's sport is vital and part of the sporting culture, I think forcing it down people's throats when they're not interested in it, and there is no interest in it, doesn't actually help grow those sports. I think you have to look at doing some research. I think the sports in general, you want to increase women's participation, if they really are serious about growing women's football or women's cricket or women's ice hockey or women's rugby or rugby league or whatever it may be, they need to actually go out into the various fan bases of the men's clubs. See how many women fans are there who would be quite happy for their daughters to play said sport. And I think that's what they have to do surveys, they have to do research, they have to talk to the clubs as well, see if it's financially viable. Because this is the thing, it has to be financially viable. Because we've seen with women's ice hockey in North America, it wasn't financially viable. The women's NBA is propped up by the men's NBA. So for all the good that the Women's Football World Cup did this summer and certain female sports stars in athletics and various other sports are doing, it has to be financially viable. And you have to work out, is there going to be a customer, a fan base there? Because if you're getting scorelines like 11-1, it actually is a worse image for the sport than if it was a 2-1. I think it doesn't help the growth of the sport. And there's going to be people out there who will probably watch this and say, oh, I'm a sexist, I'm this, I'm that. I'm not. I'm a big supporter of women's sport, but I do think there are better ways in which to grow the sports from grassroots level to make it as competitive and as financially viable as possible. And until you can do that, it's going to be financially ruinous. The women aren't going to get to develop in those sports, and those sports will end up struggling financially. We've seen it in women's ice hockey in Canada and the US, and especially Canada. The Women's Hockey League in Canada collapsed. It is the national sport. It wasn't financially viable. That should be ringing alarm bells going, hang on a second, is this going to work? And that's exactly the same for the WSL. You will get these massively lopsided scorelines, and it does more to damage the growth of the sport than help it. And the fact that 11-1, if that becomes a regular thing, it actually damages the growth of the sport, because the team that's getting battered all the time, those players aren't going to develop and those fans aren't going to show up. Plain and simple. If that continues, it doesn't really help when there's lack of competitiveness across the entire league. If only a couple of teams can really play and the other teams are really that bad. Well, as I say, I did enjoy the Women's World Cup. I did think it was a great event, and the crowds were better than expected. Not gonna lie, there were some really good crowds, really good support, good participation, some really good games. But at the same time, it didn't make nearly as much money as the men's. The stadiums they chose, I think, were the right stadiums. I think they worked out that in reality, if they chose some of the biggest stadiums in France, they would have been half filled, and it would have been embarrassing for live TV. I think the organisers, got something right there. But there are still a lot of issues to overcome. And when female football players like Megan Rapinoe are saying we deserve to be paid equally to the men, you'll bankrupt your sport. you'll bankrupt your sport. And we can discuss the pay disparity and all that, and that is an issue. And male players across the board are overpaid. Male football players, especially at the top level, are massively overpaid. And I've mentioned that regularly, that the ticket price for fans is too much. The wages are out of control. The transfer money is insane. The severance fees for managers is disgusting. Money in football is killing the sport. It's not going to the right places to develop the infrastructure that is needed for the women's game, for example. And you're seeing it with our stupidly overpriced TV and media packages that people just don't want to pay, so they illegally stream, plain and simple. And they still keep trying to sell me stuff now that I've moved. Every single media company is trying to sell me stuff, and I don't want it. I'm not willing to pay stupid amounts of money for a product that I believe is declining. I don't think the product on the field is as good as what it was 10, 15 years ago. I really don't. I think the amount of wages these guys and some girls are paid is disgusting. I think they're massively overpaid. That money should be going to the grassroots. And I don't know. I mean, cricket as well, I think the 100 format, they're trying to force that down our throats. I see it regularly on Facebook. I see it regularly on Twitter, the 100 format. And from what I am seeing, 95% of cricket fans don't want it. But it's because the TV companies have cricket by the balls, literally, or the bails in this case, that they're calling the tune. They want to sell a product. Cricket needs money. Cricket has issues with fans switching off and viewership dropping. The TV companies and the media companies have cricket where they want them. They can call the tune. That should not be how sport is governed, organised, and how rules are created and how the game develops. So we already have T20. Apparently that's too complex for families to watch. So they come up with a 100-ball format that you actually look at it and, oh my God. And you look at the players that have signed up, it's going to fail. I hope it fails. I hope it fails miserably. I hope Sky lose a lot of money out of it. Murdoch no longer owns Sky in the UK, but it's his creation. And I hope it fails, because I think cricket needs to break away from this reliance on subscription TV. It is killing the sport. Viewership is plummeting. Crowds at county and T20 and one day falling massively. And yeah, the sport is in a real bad place. The only reason why they gave us the World Cup final in the UK on free-to-air TV is England were in it. If that was Australia, New Zealand, which it could have been, great game it would have been on pay-per-view TV only. And I really, it was a sop. It was to try and keep us on side, and I think they wouldn't fully reveal how many people watched on free-to-air TV compared to on subscription TV. But it was the highest viewership they've had since 2005 on television as a whole, and that tells you something. That tells you something. They said it was the highest viewership on TV they had for 14 years. But they wouldn't tell us how many people watched on subscription and how many people watched on free-to-air. And I'll tell you now, I think the majority of people would have watched on free-to-air TV. Plain and simple. So I think the Cricket World Cup should have been on free-to-air TV. On Channel 4 and Channel 5 in the UK. We had the Women's Football World Cup. I think some of the TV bosses were a bit scared that the women's football might have been overshadowed. It would have been overshadowed, let's not be honest. Let's not lie, let's not kid ourselves. Yes, great that England won the World Cup in the men's cricket. Brilliant, positive. But I think subscription TV has damaged a lot of sports because they're heavily reliant on that money. And people aren't willing to pay it anymore. They really are not. You look at what it costs for all the subscriptions, it really isn't worth it. The average Joe doesn't have the disposable income anymore to pay for this crap. And I keep going back to it. And the ticket prices at grounds still too high. The player wages out of control. So it is what it is. I understand there is a women's ice hockey league and a men's ice hockey league, and games are put straight on YouTube. It is amateur, semi-pro. It's not the highest quality, but the rules are slightly different to the rest of the world's ice hockey rules. But that's a way to go. Make it accessible. You have to make it accessible and easy to reach. Otherwise, people just won't pick it up. They won't know it exists. And I think where some of the big mainstream sports have gone wrong is the greed. Hence why the Football World Cup in 2022 was in Qatar. And we saw with the World Athletics Championships in Qatar, people just weren't interested in going to the stadium to watch. And the conditions really weren't great to compete in. And I do fear for the Football World Cup, where they play slightly later in the year, just slightly by a month or two, the temperatures are still going to be too high, and player welfare is going to be a secondary, and fans aren't going to want to show up. I want to be interested to know how much tickets are going to cost, and a whole range of other things. Considering that Qatar itself is a very small country with a very small population, really surprised the World Cup is going there. Really surprised that they're going to continue to allow it to be played, considering all the human rights allegations of abuse and some of the other geopolitical situation in the region. I'm really surprised that FIFA is still, it's we've discussed it before. The World Championship of Athletics, I think, was a test event for the World Cup, and the low crowd tells you all you need to know. I do think the quality of football is going to be affected. I do think that probably most of the teams will struggle. There will be player welfare issues. So does that mean the squads are going to have to be bigger? I don't know. But I can see the quality of the products that we see on the TV or on the internet, depending how you consume your sport, is going to be so poor. It's not going to be a great advert for the global game. It's not going to really sell the game to new fans, which shouldn't have to because it's the most popular sport in the world. But I can see the games being very, very slow paced. I can see regular water breaks, which we've seen in the Women's World Cup this summer. It was quite hot in Western Europe at the time of a massive heat wave going on. We've seen it in the Rugby League. We've seen it in Rugby Union. We've seen it in cricket. We have seen water breaks when the temperatures reach a certain level. But I think it's just going to be really poor quality. There could be a lot of mistakes, so it could be very entertaining, but it's not actually the best quality football you're going to see, or soccer. I do think that, yeah, it's not going to be a great advert for the sport. The corruption behind the bid as well has led to the last 5-6 years of allegations against FIFA and against UEFA and CONCACAF, and all the federations are basically football's not transparent enough. It's a big issue, massive issue. Football is not transparent enough, and yeah, we're probably going to see some really slow-paced football, really methodical. I can see some of the quicker skilled players really struggling. We could see some of the more veteran players struggle as well. We could see a whole load of poor games. It could be really entertaining in the sense that there's mistakes all over the place. Fatigue has a big part to play. Substitutions will have a big part to play. But the other issue is VAR still isn't working properly. We're still having issues with the interpretation of offside because the rules are not set for what VAR is, and it's an interesting one. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and 3 years is a very long time away. We've got the Euros next summer, Euro 2020, to get through yet. The rest of the club seasons as well. So there's a lot of football to play in the next 3 years. A lot can happen. Players could retire who are, at the peak of their powers right now. Teams could fail to qualify that are expected to qualify. There's a whole range of questions that need answering before we get to this World Cup. But I do think that the governing body of the sport has really failed for years, and when it was all uncovered how corrupt things were with FIFA, it summed up the lack of trust from fans to the governing bodies, both at national and at international level. Other sports are starting to go the same way, which is a shame, and that in itself creates issues. But I think it will be interesting to see if teams like Australia, who have to make it by playing against teams from the Middle East, see how they play. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how they play. But that's a one-off game against Jordan. You've got to imagine a whole tournament in a country of similar conditions. That's a different thing. A one-off game is one thing, and if you cope well with a one-off game, that's great. But then you've got to play 7-8 games, let's say, in the World Cup to win it. That's where the difference kicks in. If you can do it for one game, is great. If you can do it for 7 games, you're world champions. And I think that's the difference. There is a one-off game, bang, multiple games, and I think the team that copes, it's like the Russia World Cup year and a half ago. Russian summers get very hot and very humid, high 30s. It didn't rain as much as expected. Normally, there's some really heavy thunderstorms. There were a couple of rainy days, but for the most part, that was played in a heat wave. And the French were the team that coped best with the conditions and got through to the final by just being consistent. Croatia got through to the final by also playing to the conditions. England got to the semi-final. Belgium got to the semi-final because they played to the conditions. It was a really strange World Cup in that sense that not a single South American team got to the semi-final stage. It was three Northern European teams and a Balkan team. So it was an interesting World Cup in that sense. But I did say before the World Cup started, I wouldn't be surprised if the final four were all European teams and a European team won the tournament. I did say that, and I was proven correct. I think France were lucky to win the tournament. They weren't the best team playing wise and how they played, but they got through to a final by hook or by crook. They got there. They started to build into the tournament at the later stages, and they won knockout games, and that's how you win the World Cup. On to the ice hockey side of things. The Mike Babcock situation, there were allegations of him doing this. You make a list, put down who's your, a player who works the hardest, player who's the laziest, to a young, Mitch Marner, who was a young rookie player at the time, and he had to present this list to the coach, and then he read the list out to the whole locker room. There were allegations of him doing that at the Detroit Red Wings. Yes, Mike Babcock, very successful coach. Olympics, World Championships, Stanley Cups. But that is not a way to motivate a player. Sacked by Toronto, the Maple Leafs. Within a few days, Bill Peters, former assistant of Mike Babcock, allegations surfaced on the internet from a former player, Azim Alou, who is a mixed race Russian-Nigerian, saying that he used racial slurs in the locker room in front of players aimed at him and his choice in music. The N-word was used more than once. Fellow teammates said to the coach, "You can't say this publicly." So there were corroborating witnesses to say that's wrong. He then had a meeting with the player, and he said that again in a private meeting. Yes, it was 10 years ago. Then after that allegation broke, Bill Peters was suspended by the Calgary Flames pending an investigation because that's where he was coaching at the time. And then evidence transpired that he'd also punched and kicked players when they were losing a game when he was coach of Carolina. Other players, ex and current, said, no, he did that. Rob Brindamore, the current coach of Carolina, said, yeah, he did that. It was reported. We dealt with it internally, blah, 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 blah. And it transpired that obviously the Flames wanted to sack him. He resigned before he was sacked. It does show up sports culture and locker room culture and what isn't acceptable. Now, this scandal hasn't gone away. It's been a week of scandal for the NHL with these two coaches and things that are coming out about their attitudes towards players and some of their methods and some of, what they do. But it does sum up an issue that hockey has done very well to hide, which is racism, which is harassment, bullying, hazing, if you will. In the last couple of years, stories have come out from various ex-players and coaches about some pretty abominable behaviour that has taken place, abuses. And Dan Carcillo, former player, mentioned some of the issues he faced as a junior player and as a minor league player with some of the things that happened in the locker room that were, just not acceptable. You may know it as hazing, but I class that as physical and sexual abuse, but that's another thing. And what I noticed was when I was looking at watching the press conference that Brad Treliving, the general manager of the Calgary Flames, was giving. It was on Sportsnet, which is a Canadian sports channel. some of the comments were pretty disgusting, to be honest, about saying how these players are soft and how the world's gone soft, and it's just banter. It's really not. Singling out a person because of their ethnicity, a character flaw, whatever it may be, publicly humiliating them in front of a room full of people. If I was to do that in my workplace, just to target the Jamaican lad at work, who, by the way, is a hard bastard, I wouldn't do it. He would wipe the floor with me, probably shoot me, actually. I would be fired. I would be suspended, investigated, and fired. I wouldn't get a severance package. I wouldn't get my unpaid wages, or I would be sacked, done, and criminal charges would result. If I was to not be happy with someone at work and punch and kick them, I'll be fired. Just because it happens in sport doesn't mean they're above, contract law or the law itself. And it does raise questions about the culture of the sport. This is a very troubling couple of incidents for the NHL. And there is more to come out. I think some ex-players and ex-coaches, or current coaches and current players, will be looking over their shoulders going, what's going to be said next? Who's going to be accused of doing something next? What damage is this going to do to the reputation of a sport that I think is one of the better sports out there for integrity and transparency? What's going to happen next? We've seen a whole host of allegations and a whole host of sports of abuses by coaches and players, and clubs sweeping it under the carpet and all sorts. What's going to come up next, and how damaging would that be for the image of the NHL that wants to get a US TV deal worth billions of dollars? They don't have a unified US TV deal yet. They have one in Canada. They sell the product overseas, but they're trying to sort out a big TV deal in the US in the next couple of years. And these kind of allegations coming out and these stories coming out damage the image of the product they want to put out there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. There's more to come on that one. On the cricket side of things, New Zealand are, I think, doing England quite handsomely. Yes, Mike Babcock has played in the minor leagues and amateur leagues around. Interesting character, very successful coach, as we know. He's not well liked at all. There are a lot of coaches in the game who are hard, gritty characters who will tell you to your face, you fouled up. You got to do better. But their ex-players will still invite them for a drink, still go for a meal with them, and still keep in contact with them. Mike Babcock doesn't have that rapport with the media, doesn't have that rapport with his ex-players and some of his former coaches that were his assistants. He's not a very popular guy. There are corroborating stories from his time coaching the Detroit Red Wings, where he did a similar thing with players, where he told them to list the hardest working, laziest players, or the fittest, the unfittest, the friendliest, the least friendliest, all that kind of thing. Make a list, ranking top to bottom, who you like, dislike, all that kind of thing. And that list was then read out publicly in front of the locker room, normally using younger players as well, rookie players that were maybe losing a bit of form. He would target certain players and make them do these lists. And that's not how you motivate. That's not motivation. That's bullying. That's singling out an individual and basically undermining them. Now, Mitch Marner is still a Toronto Maple Leafs player. He's one of their better players. He's injured at the moment, but he's still a Maple Leafs player. Mike Babcock is no longer the coach. That tells you something about things. But no, from everything I've heard and seen on the internet and the interviews I've seen with players and coaches who've worked with Mike Babcock, he's not. There's military ideas, and then there's military ideas. I don't think you would see this in any military training handbook, singling out a guy in front of everyone else, because that creates distrust. It damages the team chemistry. If anyone was to do that in my workplace or any workplace as a manager, complaints would come in. That manager would be investigated. That manager would be fired. That supervisor would be fired. That's not how you motivate people. I think what has come out about Mike Babcock is it's his way or the highway. He believes that's the right way to motivate players. It really isn't. It really isn't the way to get players to play for you. That's to get players to play in spite of you, and that's not a healthy player-coach relationship. That's not a healthy locker room. That's not a happy locker room. That's not a successful team. Yes, he's won a Stanley Cup with Detroit, but that's not how a successful team operates. That's not how a happy team operates, and that's not how you build a good working relationship with your group of players that you've got to win with. It's what it is. The Bill Peters one is more serious. There's racism and assault allegations in there, and they have been corroborated by witnesses. He's decided to resign from his position as head coach in Calgary, and it does raise questions about what goes on behind the closed doors, which the fans don't see, which the media don't see. And it's going to be interesting what comes out with ex players who let's say retired from the sport or just in sport in general, ex athletes who say about their teammates, their coaches, the club coaches, the team coaches, the training coaches. I think this could be the match that lights the fuse that a lot of stories come out, not just in the NHL. We've seen it in English football with allegations of coaches abusing youth players. This could be the trigger that really unloads a lot of stuff, really damages a lot of sporting integrity. Ice hockey was seen as like one of those sports that was more transparent, seemed to be a fairer sport, seemed to be a more welcoming sport. Clearly, in the last few years, there have been a lot of stories coming out which have shone a light on something that we don't see. We don't see as fans. We don't see as the media. We're now seeing something that has been unseen for so long. And I think society has changed, but I think certain prejudice is still there. And with a player coming out and saying when he was a young youth player he was racially, targeted by a coach, and other players defending him saying you can't say that to the coach, yet the coach continued to target this player because of his racial background. Basically, what Bill Peters has done says a lot about the culture in the sport then and now that it has taken him 10 years, and other players of African American or Afro-Caribbean origin or African origin have basically said at least once in our lives we have faced this in the sport. But I think it goes a step further than that. I think there are still issues and boundaries in place. The lack of coaches from minority backgrounds coaching in the NHL or in ice hockey in general, it's still there. We've heard, I think, one coach from First Nations background, Ted Nolan. Grant Fuhr has been a goalie coach. He's of mixed race. And there's, I think, another coach, an assistant coach in one of the teams who's from a minority background. It doesn't sound good when it's a predominantly white sport. There needs to be more outreach to these minority communities, be it African American, Asian American, be it Oriental or Southern, Indian subcontinental. There needs to be a better outreach. That we have seen a lot more players from First Nation, Native American heritage playing and coaching, but I think there needs to be more outreach into these communities, better investment in these communities. And a better relationship with these communities, because if the slogan from the NHL is hockey is for everyone, clearly it still isn't. And we're seeing this with a lot of sports where there are still these racist or prejudiced roadblocks in place for coaches and players and fans. And I think flip it the other way, in South Africa, football, or as you would call it, soccer, is a predominantly black sport with very few white fans and players. And it's an interesting one how you flip it the other way. Yeah, it's a predominantly native sport, whereas the white and then the Asian communities in South Africa don't really get a look in or don't even want to play because they feel that it's not their cup of tea for whatever reason. And sport should be for everyone. There should be no boundaries But the NHL has got a PR nightmare on its hands, trying to fix this situation and not sweep it under the carpet that there isn't an issue, because I think there's going to be more allegations coming out, not just against Bill Peters, but I think not just against Mike Babcock necessarily, but against other coaches and players and organisations who've not dealt with these situations correctly. But it also raises an idea of how far back you go. How far back in time do you go with an active player or an active coach, and bring up these what was said, what was done a decade, 2 decades ago? How far back do you go? Is there a statute of limitations with these things? On these issues, how far back do you go? How far back do you dig up? Because I don't think Bill Peters coaches in North America again. Any team in any league, NHL, AHL, ECHL, SPHL, some of the minor juniors, some of the other regional leagues, I don't think he gets a job. Now, does he? If he comes to Europe to coach, which team is going to be brave enough to go, yeah, we'll have this guy? Who's going to be brave enough to go, we'll have him coach our team? Considering in Europe, again, is a big minority communities of, the former colonial countries that, were colonies of the European nations, massive populations of Africans and Asians, Middle East origins as well. We're seeing now in Europe a lot more of these minority groups getting involved with not just ice hockey but other sports. Which European team or European league is going to go, yeah, we'll give this guy a chance? Who's going to risk the PR nightmare and the issue of getting him to coach their team? Mike Babcock, I think we could see possibly coach again in North America, but Bill Peters, who's going to be brave enough to take the risk, considering there are racism and assault allegations against him? And I think there's more to come on this story. I think more is going to come out. I think there's going to be, it's not going to go away. I think the NHL would like it to go away. I think the sport in general would like it to go away. It won't. Something else is going to happen yet. I think there's more to come on this, but which team is going to be brave enough to go, we'll give him a second chance? It's most likely going to be in Europe, but who's going to be brave enough? That raises a lot of questions. Also in the summer, we had the Jeffrey Boycott, OBE or MB or whatever it was, and his car crash of an interview, where he was ambushed about the domestic violence conviction allegations against him. Jeffrey Boycott comes across as not a very pleasant individual either when it comes to cricket. I didn't discuss it much at the time. I'm touching on it now because, again, how far back do you go to dig up things from the past when talking about a player or a coach or a media personality in sport? How far do you go back? How far do you dig up? It's I use him as an example. He has got a conviction for domestic violence. There were some grey, murky areas around it at that particular incident. But Jeffrey Boycott, again, comes across as an individual who's not a particularly nice guy. How far back do you go? How far back do you go? It's a thing. There's a lot of things we could discuss. I mean, we could look at some of the allegations against certain people. Certain players in certain sports have had drug convictions, drink driving, assault. Still great athletes on the field, but how far back do you go when they're being honoured for their contributions to sport or their contributions to community projects? How far back do you go? It does raise a precedent issue. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Bill Peters thing. It'll be interesting to see, how things transpire with a whole variety of issues. It would be apt if someone had put the headline "Time has run out" for Boycott. I think Jeffrey Boycott, I'm not a big fan of him. I don't like him as a commentator. I think his views on cricket are outdated. I think the sport has evolved massively. He hasn't mentioned anything about the 100 format. And I think we'll be in agreement on the 100 format. I think he would dislike it. But I don't like him as a person. I think he is a very, I wouldn't say old school, because there's old school personalities and then there's just vile personality. And I like some of my sport played old school where it's physical, like especially ice hockey and rugby where it's physical and in your face. I like some old school style when it comes to sports. And sometimes you need those old school style personalities who do speak their mind. But at the same time, there's old school and actually away from sport being a top bloke or a pretty good woman as well, away from the field of battle. And then there's those who were not well liked on the field and are even more hated off the field. There is the difference, and this is something that's come out with the Bill Peters and Mike Babcock allegations in the NHL. Is there are some hard-nosed coaches in the NHL away from the game. Nice as pie. They very upstanding members of their community, but they're so passionate about the sport, and when they're coaching or playing, they're going to say things. They're going to say you are an effing idiot. You've effed up. But what's been said by some of the ex-players is we played under some coaches who were hard-nosed old school. They believed in a certain work ethic. They believed in a certain style. But away from game day and away from training practice, we would go, and have a drink together and have a chat. And since I've retired, we still go and have barbecues and do golf tournaments, and we still are friends. That's the difference between old school and toxic. And unfortunately, the few bad eggs that come out damage the reputation of a sport massively. And yeah, there is old school and then there is dinosaurs, and I think Boycott is a dinosaur. Absolutely. I think we'll see what happens with some of these allegations that have come out in the NHL and how they impact not just ice hockey but other sports. And then we go back to some of the allegations about Dario Gradi and his time at Crewe Alexandra by not following up on reports that fellow coaches were abusing youth players. Again, there's a culture and there's an issue. And this is where sport, I think, needs to take a lead and be more transparent. And this is where I think sport is going wrong. It's not being transparent enough with its fans. It's not being transparent enough with the media. And it's just not being transparent enough with just the general process of things. There's too much of ignore that. But how far back do you go when it comes to an individual and allegations of racism or bullying or lesser crimes? How far back do you go? Because we've seen players have punch-ups on the training field with each other. And how far back do you go when you come to honouring a player's achievements or a coach's achievements? Oh, we'll dig up that incident where he was caught swearing at an official and he got a suspension for some slur he made or some drunken night out where he got in a punch-up. How far back do you go? Because what I've seen is a lot of sports fans are very, very quick to ignore certain flaws with some of their sporting idols. Very, very quick. I do believe in giving people second chances, but it seems some of the people given second chances have multiple failings. On the football side of things, if we can go back to this managerial turnaround, I do think this transfer window in January is going to be very busy. And I think if Everton are going to get rid of is it Safar? Oh God! If Everton are going to make a managerial change and Man United are going to make a managerial change, they have to do it before the end of December, before the transfer window opens. I think if Solskjaer and oh God, what's the Everton manager? Silva. If Silva and Solskjaer are still there by the 1st of January, I think it is too late to make a change. I think. I think Everton are in a situation where they've again underachieved for what they are. Haven't won a trophy for 24 years. Yeah, they've massively underachieved. Massively. One of the best teams in the 80s and early 90s, massively underachieved over the last 20 odd years. And if they don't get their shit together, yeah, they are going to get possibly relegated. I think what needs to happen is if they are going to make a change behind the bench, they have to do it now. Same with Man United. What has happened at some of these clubs like Arsenal and Man United is they've had the same manager for so long, the same voice in the dressing room for so long, that the fans don't know any different, and a lot of the players have only played with one coach. And now you look at Man United, multiple coaches since Ferguson retired. Arsenal now on their second manager since Wenger stepped down within 18 months. I think you're going to see these clubs become less stable until they get that first piece of silverware again. Now, Man United have won a few trophies under Mourinho and Van Gaal, and Moyes even won the Charity Shield. So the silverware was still drip feeding in, but they're not as good as what they were. They're declining. Again, you have to look at Ed Woodward. You have to look at transfer policy. You have to look at the ownership. Same with Arsenal. Transfer policy, youth policy, ownership, direction. And I can see parallels with both clubs. Both clubs, parallels. And yeah, Wenger still got those last 3 FA Cups, but the success was less and the quality of football was less and the league position was dropping. Cricket, I've done a video on my favourite sports last summer, 2018. And if I was to do a video, I would have to do it over the Christmas period, which I've got off. I've got a couple of days off over Christmas. And I could look at where my favourite sports rank now and where they are. Cricket doesn't rank as highly as it would have done 10, 15 years ago. I've always been clear on that. And part of that is to do with the media package that's in place here in the UK and abroad. There's a whole host of issues with cricket and the lack of it on accessible free-to-air TV. Very little on the free-to-air. And the subscription packages are overpriced and it is actually strangling the sport. But I can say cricket has got a lot of issues. A lot of corruption allegations simmering under the surface, match fixing, spot fixing, corruption, misappropriation of funds. So there's a whole host of issues. Headset. Let's get this headset comfortable. That's better. So yeah, there's a whole host of issues with the sport at governance level and behind the scenes. And I think on my sports rankings, I think it would not be in my top 5 anymore. Wouldn't be in my top 5. I think my sports rankings now to what they were a year ago have changed. I think where I rate sports has changed. And I can definitely do an updated video on that in due course. I think there are a lot of things that need to be discussed. And cricket as itself, a lot of issues behind the scenes, a lot of allegations about corruption at various levels, from governance through to match fixing, spot fixing, that aren't going away. Basically, Hansi Cronje and what happened with him 2 decades ago are still having an effect on the sport now, because there's a whole host of players in prison, allegations coming out, coaches being implicated, a whole host of things. So cricket is a sport that's wide open to that kind of abuse. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. But I think there are some green shoots in place with some changes that have come in. But I still think there are massive problems that the sport faces. And we'll see what happens. But there's some other issues as well, structurally. There are hurdles to overcome within the sport. So I think it's ranking lower than what it was when I was younger, watching and playing it. Now that I'm older, it's less accessible to watch, and I don't play it anymore. So I think it has fallen down on my list of sports. It has massively because of the lack of accessibility. What's seen to be as an elitist sport, which it isn't, because you can just be an average Joe and sign up for your local cricket club. No, you're not as elitist as you think. But it has declined on my point of view, where it ranks in the sports that I watch and love. I still love cricket, don't get me wrong. I still have a fondness for the sport, but I think it's a sport that has a lot of issues. Aubameyang is going to be crucial if Arsenal want to get out of this situation they are in. I don't play fantasy teams, don't play fantasy sports. It's not my cup of tea. I just don't enjoy it. But Aubameyang is one of the key players for Arsenal. And I think the issue with Arsenal is to do with their midfield and defence, and not having a proper, true leader in that side, a strong personality who is a respected leader in that side. But Norwich are one of the better promoted sides to come up in promotion over the years. This Norwich squad is a hard-working team. It's going to be hard for Arsenal today. It's not going to be easy. And they will. It's 2-2, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stay that way. We've seen Arsenal be in these positions in a tightly fought, contested game, and then go on to lose embarrassingly late on. So until the final whistle, as long as it's 2-2, Arsenal could lose 4-2. They could win 3-2, but they're losing these games and dropping points because they're not getting over the line. They're not being ruthless enough, and they're not defensively tight enough at the back. So Lundberg, as I say, has got a hard job in place, but the players seem to respect him. They seem to respect him as a coach when he was a coach under Emery. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond to him being the main voice in the dressing room now. If they can get at least a point out of this, it's a positive result because they were losing. So if they can come from behind, that shows a bit more character. But if they were in the lead and winning 2-1 and they've just been pegged back, that would be a different story. It's the same old Arsenal in a lead, can't hold on to a lead, So there are a lot of issues that Arsenal have to face. A lot of that's defensive fragility, closing out games, that mindset. Tactically, I think they get things wrong. But I've done a video on that, and I've discussed that with the sacking video of Unai Emery. But possibly, I think they've got a bigger gap than last season, which they squandered. But the Christmas period is going to prove crucial, and Fabinho is injured, so they have lost a key component of their midfield. But I do think they have that bigger cushion than they had last season, and Man City look far less impressive this year. I think Leicester and Chelsea. Leicester, I think, are the most improved team out of the chasing pack, and I think they do it with a good work ethic, and that they have some positivity with Brendan Rodgers as their coach. So he seems happy there. The players seem to respond to Brendan Rodgers. I think he got an unfair press at Liverpool when he was there. He has a style of football that he wants to play. I think he's adapted his style to Leicester, who suit more of a counter-attack style. But Leicester have kept a good part of their core together that won the Premier League a few years ago. They've kept a good core of players. And they seem, whenever they sell a player, they seem to replace that player pretty well. They seem to actually also have a decent youth system at Leicester as well. So I think Leicester will give Liverpool a good run. And Leicester have got more points than they had when they won the league at this stage. So Leicester are more improved. I think Liverpool are more improved. I think Man City might have peaked with what they've got as their leadership core. And a lot of their players have played a lot of football. And some of those players at Man City are starting to become injury prone. The Sterling situation could be overshadowing things. And Guardiola, his tenure at Man City is contingent on him winning the Champions League. I think if he can't get Champions League, and the fans on side with UEFA Champions League as well, Man City and UEFA don't have a positive relationship. The fans aren't very positive when it comes to supporting the team in Europe. That's why they call it the empty Etihad. They have to pump fake fan noise in to make it seem like the stadium's full. So Man City have some issues. I think Chelsea under Lampard have responded. I do. I think they have responded. But now Klopp winning that first cup final with Liverpool as well and winning the Champions League, I think that's given them the boost. I think that's given them a boost to build on. But Leicester are better than where they were when they won the Premier League. So it's going to be an interesting fight. I think the festive period will tell us a lot. I think the cup schedules with the FA Cup and League Cup will also, and the Champions League and European and Europa League will also tell a lot. Leicester, of the top teams, haven't got a European campaign this season, so they're playing less games. That could benefit Leicester as well with the squad rotation. So the festive period and then Champions League and Europa League games, because Leicester don't have to play those games. They just have to play in the FA Cup, League Cup. I think that will benefit Leicester massively and hinder Liverpool, Man City and Chelsea in the top four. So I think Leicester, out of the chasing pack, actually have an advantage by playing less games. So less chance to get players injured, more rest days. They can rotate that squad. It's going to be interesting. I think Liverpool have got a good cushion in place, but we've seen before. Teams have a good lead going into Christmas and then be chased down. We've seen it with Arsenal before. We've seen it with Blackburn when we nearly lost the title on the last day of the season because we had a good, comfortable lead at Christmas and then we struggled the second half of the season. And I'm a Blackburn fan. You can check out all my videos on them and the clubs that I support. So we have seen teams chased down before when it comes to title races. But I think Liverpool are that step ahead, and I think Leicester have improved. City, I think, have peaked, and Chelsea are having a resurgence under Lampard. But is it enough? Is it enough this season under Lampard? So it'll be interesting to see which which teams end up where, but I think that's going to be the top four. In what order, I don't know, but I think its favourites are Liverpool, but I think the chasing three are pretty closely matched, and it'll be an interesting Christmas festive period. I think this is going to be a very important festive period this year. I think it might have more importance than in previous years. So we'll see what happens. I think there's a lot to happen yet. Injuries will play a part, suspensions, fixture congestion. I think Leicester that's advantage Leicester with having less fixtures. And the other three, injuries to start having a toll. I think Leicester play a certain style and all the players buy into that style. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But, we'll have to wait and see on that one. But yeah, Kante and Maguire, I mean, that's an interesting one. Maguire, I think he's regretting his move to Man United now. I feel sorry for Harry Maguire. I think he is a solid defender, but I also think he's not worth the money that Man United paid for him. And I think Leicester didn't really want to lose him, but at the same time, they've made a lot of money and they have adequately replaced him. So, be careful what you wish for when you want to go to your, the big club. Some of these so-called big clubs aren't doing so well, as we've seen this season. The last few years, actually. Some of these historically successful clubs over the last 20, 30 years are now declining. And it's not just in England, it's across Europe. Some of these historically successful clubs are not what they were and are having, they're having their stagnant periods where they're not going to be as successful. And it's going to be interesting. AC Milan, not the club they were. Bayern Munich, I think, have peaked and, aren't the club that they were, although they are still a very competitive team. Lyon were the dominant force in French football for so long, and so were Marseille. PSG basically buying the French league for eternity has damaged the French domestic game. Absolutely, it's not the league it was. And then you look across Europe, Real and Barcelona and Atletico are starting to be challenged by some of the up and coming clubs in Spain. Nottingham Forest, a load of clubs have been successful for a period of time and then they are less successful. It's a thing, it's a trend, it happens. And the media obsession with certain clubs in this country is another reason why I dislike football intensely. It gets dull hearing about the same clubs 90% of the time. There are 98 or 92 Football League clubs, or 91 as Bury have gone out of business, but drop me there. There are 90-odd fan bases in the Football League, plus the non-league. You don't need to hear about 4 or 5 clubs daily. It does get dull. It gets very dull, very frustrating when there are some big stories happening across football that aren't getting reported because these certain clubs get the majority of the media attention. And yeah, you look online, you look at the comments on social media, and a lot of fans are really, really pissed off by hearing the same clubs over and over again in the media. It gets dull. It switches fans off. Fans actually switch off. Oh yeah, I've seen all sorts on various things. There were 92 Football League clubs at the start of the season. Obviously, Bury went out of business. There's now 91. But there are some talent shows things and some quiz things where certain people have these talents of naming off every professional team. That is mad. I think that was Britain's Got Talent or something like that. One of those talent shows on the TV. That is mad. Absolutely mad. But people have that talent. I think with what I've seen as a football fan or as a sports fan in general, certain sports and certain teams get more media coverage than I think is justified. And when you have a country like Great Britain, which has the UK, which has so many professional sports and so many high-profile athletes, when certain sports seem to get the majority, or certain teams, or in those sports especially, seem to get the majority of the press coverage, it does become a bit frustrating as that fan who, or those majority of fans that have no interest. Man United, most of their fan base don't live in the UK; they live abroad. Um, you know, they're not as popular in Manchester as the media would have you believe. A lot of I mean, I could list off every Premier League Championship team since '92, but I don't want to. It's fun, but at the same time, it's also boring for the majority of people. I mean, I could list off the Stanley Cup champions in my lifetime in ice hockey, but in the NHL, but that would only interest a small proportion of the subscriber base of this channel, so I don't do it. Fun it would be looking at that, and I could do a video. Oh yes, Google has made such exercises pointless. It has sort of ruined the unique talents that some people have. But at the same time, it has made it easier to research things. So this channel has benefited from not just Google, but the internet and search engines and encyclopedias and websites that like Wikipedia, things like that. It has been this channel exists because of the search engine and because of the internet. It is interesting, however, sports relationship with the internet. Major League Baseball now shows live games on YouTube. Major League Rugby posts all full match replays on YouTube. NASCAR, YouTube, streams it live to the US audience. So certain sports and certain sports leagues have used the internet very effectively to reach a wider fan base who feel disenfranchised with the traditional media that you would, receive your information from. So the TV in this case. I can see free streaming sites like YouTube, and there are others, Twitch, out there, BitChute. Over time, getting sports rights and mainstream media having to make their product also attractive again to the wider masses. I think what we've seen in recent years is so many scandals in the media that it has put people off the mainstream media in sport when it comes to sports broadcasting on TV. It doesn't. It doesn't. In that sense, but it's a great way to reach out to a younger demographic. It is a great way to reach out to a younger audience. The average age of a TV audience now is over 34. So my age group are switching off traditional forms of media, and they have been for the last 2 decades. It's a trend that is continuing. The younger people are switching off, but it does mean that the mainstream sports media on the TV needs to up its game. And what has been noticed is subscription TV or cable is losing subscribers because of the cost. Because salaries for younger people are lower now in real terms than their parents at the same age, they're not paying for it. Illegal streaming is a thing. And the amount of money sports leagues and TV companies put into trying to shut down these illegal streams, they could be putting into making better products that people actually watch on the TV. I can see free-to-air TV getting more and more sports rights again. It's a thing that's happening. The financial crisis had also had an impact on media outlets cutting staff and cutting costs. We're starting to see a reversal in that. But you have to make the product you are putting out interesting enough for people who want to watch. And the main thing that seems to get viewers watching is sport on the TV, as long as it's free to air. And this is what fans are saying. We've had enough of paying for through the nose for poor quality product, which is putting people off. The product that Sky and BT in the UK are putting out is not good quality. Now, free sports is cheaper because it's free, but Premier Sports is cheaper as a subscription because they don't have the big studio costs. They don't have all these big high-paid presenters. They're putting out a product that is cheaper, and the production values they just show the sport. They do away with the pre-match build-up and that pre-match show that no one really cares about. They just show you the sport. There you go, game started, watch it. Half-time, let's put some ads on. You make your cup of tea. Come back, sports on, watch it. And they've got it right. They've gone in with a budget, and they're sticking to that budget, and they're growing rapidly. They're making money. More people are subscribing to Premier and Free Sports and watching it. Their viewership is up year on year. Whereas you look at Sky and BT's hemorrhaging money, and Sky is facing restructuring under Comcast in 2 years' time. And people are just switching off those media outlets. They're not willing to pay this obscene amount of money per month that Sky and BT demand. People are just going, no, not paying it. Nope, not paying it. And they've got to figure out, they've got to work out, how can we get to our target audience? Well, the business model is failing. People aren't willing to pay that much money, yet they're willing to subscribe to Amazon Prime, which, by the way, they're not paying any tax. So I'm boycotting. Simple. Pretty simple, really, isn't it? I have to pay my taxes. I've got to pay my bills. You pay yours. Simple. If people started realizing how much Amazon and other big broadcasters and internet, websites are avoiding in tax, and they boycotted them, they'll very quickly pay their taxes. I can assure you that they would very quickly pay their taxes if enough people boycotted their products. And with some of these, like Amazon Prime and Netflix and all these things, a lot of them don't pay tax. They don't declare profits. So if you start boycotting their services, they will start paying their taxes. Because when it becomes so negative in the press that they're not paying their way, they lose customers. Losing customers, not good. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens with future TV rights and media rights deals, especially as Amazon now declared that they're not paying tax again. Be very interesting to see if the Premier League is still willing to keep giving them the TV rights to the Premier League. Tennis, the New York Open, the US Open in New York on Amazon. Be very interesting to watch the viewership figures for that and see how they are doing, and how many people in the UK actually watch that. Oh, look, it's a thing. It's an issue. I believe in shared rights for TV. We see that with the NRL and AFL, that they're shown on Channel 9 and on Fox in Australia. They share the rights. You can choose to have the free-to-air or the subscription service. And on the subscription service in Australia, you don't have ad breaks. You pay for a ad-free match. Whereas here, you pay for the football or the rugby league or the rugby union on Sky, and you're still bombarded with ads. It doesn't matter that you've paid for the sports subscription. You're still getting ads every injury break, and it's just like, but I've paid a subscription. Why am I getting ads on something that should be ad-free? It's bizarre. But I'm looking at all these subscription TV things and streaming services. You add it all together, it actually costs more than just paying for cable. You look at the US subscription fee things, so you got like Netflix, Now TV, Hulu, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, all this bollocks. And you look at the average fee for a cable bill, average cable, and then you look at all the subscription services. That includes the sport TV subscriptions like NHL, Centre Ice, and all that. It actually costs more to put them all together for all the things you want to watch than just standard cable. You're better off with cable. But the problem is, because mainstream TV is not making products that we want and programs we want, it's a double-edged sword. You've got to give the consumer what they want. And in sport, they're trying. This is the 100 format. It's a product of a TV company basically telling a sport what it wants to have, rather than the sport going, here's the product. Let's advertise this. Let's sell this to as many people as possible around the world. The TV company's going, right, we're losing viewers on this product you've given us. Here's an idea from a TV company executive. Let's come up with like a game show version of it. That's basically what Sky Sports have done with cricket with the 100 is they've gone, right, we're losing viewers because the product you have is dull. We have paid too much for this, so we're going to change how the game is played. Here's the 100 format, which no one wants. And I can see Sky and the ECB having a backlash. Wait, they are having a backlash. Fans are not happy. The majority of non-contracted ECB players are going, this is crap. The only people coming out in favour on centralised contracts, so they're the yes men, They've been told in their contract you have to agree with everything the ECB says. Oh, I love the 100 format. It's a great idea. You can tell it's a rehearsed speech from those players who are on centralised contracts that they've been told you have to agree with what the ECB is telling you to say. The 100 format is crap. Read the 100 format, how they're changing the game. It's not cricket. It's a different sport entirely. It's game show-esque. It's mimic. It's crap, utter crap. And they're trying to sell that to young kids and families, especially housewives and their kids. So it's already basically gender stereotyping, which is, as we've seen with the as I call the loony left, you can't do that. You can't stereotype people's gender. So already they've cut off on the wrong PR front, saying this is aimed at housewives and kids. Housewives and kids. How many housewives who are stay at home do you know these days who don't work? Really crap PR. And the only players that are coming out in support of this crap thing are on ECB centralised contracts. The players that aren't either don't speak their mind because they want to get an ECB centralised contract because that means better wages, or they just are not playing in it, so it doesn't interest them. It doesn't bother them. They're not playing in it. They're playing county or one day or T20 county cricket. They're not on an ECB centralised contract. It doesn't bother them. They're not playing in the format. It doesn't bother them. And look at the kits. The kits are hideous, and it looks like they are literally aiming fast food adverts at kids. They are crap. Utter crap. The team location's crap. I, for one, ain't going to watch. I don't see how it's going to really... but they're trying to aim it at new fans, not the existing fan. But the existing fan is switching off. This is where the ECB do not understand. The existing fan is switching off because the sport is becoming inaccessible because of the TV package. So they can't watch on regular free-to-air. They're not willing to pay stupid amounts of money. The TV companies have taken away the IPL from free-to-air TV. That's gone on to BT. If you want to watch the Australian Test Series, that's on BT Sport. No one wants to buy that. It's crap and overpriced. Crowds are down massively. So they have to discount tickets for test matches. Yet if you're an overseas fan, you have to pay twice as much. So that's racially stereotyping. The Ben Stokes situation and Alex Hales hasn't helped. Alex Hales basically being a cokehead and Ben Stokes being a violent drunken thug and a homophobe and a mocker of the disabled. But that's okay because he's the best player we've got. So we can look over that and brush that under the carpet. It's okay, which it isn't. The allegations that he beat up his missus, but that playful play fighting in public. Yeah, throttling a woman in public is playful and play fighting, is it, in public? Come on, that is a statement saying, oh, no, didn't we see that with Charles Saatchi and Nigella Lawson, where he did exactly the same thing in a public place, basically having an argument and then throttling her. So basically, okay. They're basically going, we are basically owned by Sky Sports. We have no money. We've buggered up. The Cricket World Cup, look, we showed the final on free-to-air TV. Look, we're still relevant. Didn't show any of the other tournament. No highlights package on free-to-air TV. Every match on Sky, apart from the final, which was also on Sky, but free-to-air. So that really got fans on board with the cricket spirit. Fans only got interested when we got to the knockout stages anyway and beat Australia in the semi-final. If Australia played New Zealand, that final would not have been on free-to-air TV, and the average fan would have been denied what would have probably been an equally entertaining final between two nations who really are rivals. So this is my view on cricket. I'm ranting a little bit, but this is basically how the ECB are thinking is, oh my God, Sky basically calling the tune on cricket right now. We have to do what they tell us. So a TV executive has come up with the 100 format and gone, your product is crap. No one's watching it. Not because we're overpricing it, but because it's crap. That's basically what Sky are saying. Even though it's not a crap product, it's Sky have made it crap by overpricing it. Here's the 100 format. So we're going to turn it into a game show kind of thing and try and get housewives and kids. So we make the game more complicated because apparently kids can't understand basic 6 balls and over, 10, 20, 50 overs, 100 overs. Nice even numbers there. Let's make it a weird number of overs, and then the last couple of overs, let's make it weird number of balls. Apparently, we're selling that to housewives and kids. So already it's stereotyping that everyone who is a stay-at-home parent is a woman, and that every kid is a mathematical genius. Not interested. The reaction I've seen on social media is 95, 98% of fuck off, leave our sport alone. Most traditional cricket fans are switching off. Um, they're not happy. Cricket's already losing its fan base. So they're trying to get new fans to the game. They're not catering to the original fan, but the original fan is switching off. So what you've got here is a sport in terminal decline because of the TV rights package and the constant scandal and the lack of accessibility and the media's portrayal of it being elitist and the high-profile players misbehaving and not getting punished. It's kind of a head-scratcher here how this is going to work. But that's the rant over. I've ranted about it enough. I'm not a fan of the 100. I never will be. It's not cricket. It's a brand new sport. Therefore, those players playing it should either be cricket players or 100 players, and that's it. It's not the same sport. It's a joke. It's a travesty. I don't know. I don't see how housewives and kids are going to want to watch this when it's basically crap. Look what happened last year with the AAF, the American Association of American Football, whatever it is, when they basically tried to alter what the CFL and NFL was, so American football, and come up with a slightly variable format. It failed after 8 games. After 8 rounds of games, it collapsed and cost Tim Dundon hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a financial failure. Better quality, financial failure. It's basically like saying, we have rugby sevens in rugby union. We have rugby nines in rugby league. What we're going to do is combine the two sports and have 35 players aside with both rule sets being used. Okay, that's going to work. It makes no sense. It's badly thought out. It's a knee-jerk reaction to a sport that is losing fans, is losing money, and people are losing interest. But Sky were very kind to give us the World Cup final on Channel 4. The whole World Cup should have been on Channel 4 and Channel 5. Shared rights on 2 channels. Should have been on from the get-go. It wasn't. Fans felt let down. No highlights package on free-to-air TV either. All on Sky. Sky hold the tune. Sky hold all the cards. And I think this is where the next TV deal needs to be properly assessed. And the ECB, I think, needs to be completely restructured. Completely. I think there needs to be a clear out of those who made a lot of the members of the ECB have made a lot of money out of giving themselves nice bonuses when the sport is in crisis, absolute crisis. And now we're seeing racist allegations again with players being racially abused in cricket, which is just unacceptable. Unacceptable. And the ECB not really going, right, this fan should be banned for life. Or the New Zealand Cricket Board as well. Both the ECB and New Zealand Cricket Board. They're playing a test series. Jofra Archer's been racially abused. That fan should be banned for life. We're not having that kind of conversation from the governing bodies. Not at all. They'd rather we'll sweep that under the carpet. But look, the 100's coming. The 100's coming. No one is interested. No one wants it. Absolutely no one wants it. But it's like the Football World Cup going to Qatar. It's literally the TV firms and the sponsors and the money, the greedy money, have gone, here you go. We own you. You dance to our tune rather than actually going, well, this is a country that's got a great footballing heritage. We'll put the tournament here. Oh, Qatar. It's a very wealthy, cash-rich country. Not really got any football heritage, but they have lots of sponsors and they have lots of money, and they're going to bribe us. Like, oh, bribery. Yes, we'll put it there. It's the same thing. This is where cricket's got a problem. It's chased the money. It's trying to do what football's done. Football in itself has damaged itself by chasing the money. Rugby union seems to not chase the money as much, although it's starting to go the same way. And rugby league has no money, so it needs to chase the money, but it just can't because it's not really working as a product, which is a shame because I think the NRL is a great product to sell. Super League, not so much. There are issues with finances, but it is what it is. The NHL, as I say, with what we discussed about Bill Peters and Mike Babcock and the allegations that have come out against these two coaches in the last week, that have created a big scandal in North America, especially with Bill Peters. The NHL and ice hockey in general is a great product. It's a fast-paced sport, physical sport, a bit of everything. You've got fights, you've got skill, you've got pace, power, big hits, all this kind of thing. but at the same time doesn't have a decent TV package in the US. So therefore can't sell a unified package to the rest of the world. We get drip fed games over here in the UK. I don't know what the package is like around the rest of the world, but it's having issues with its media rights. Probably the best sport in the world can't get a good media rights package. NFL, crap sport, massive media package because money. Money. It's a sport littered with scandal, littered with players committing sexual, violent, firearms, drugs, drink, you name it, offences, domestic violence, sexual rape allegations, assault, firearms, dog fighting. Yeah, animal rights abuses. Michael Vick, anyone? Biggest sport in the US. Player welfare concerns, drug misuse. Biggest sport in the US. Worth tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. Plays 4 games a year in London. Tries to flog their American crap over here. And the puck hard to see thing. I mean, look, that is an issue, but I think as time goes on, the more games you watch, the more you can figure out who's got the puck. It could be the camera angles that the Australian League use, I'm assuming, or the NHL use. But once you actually start watching a few games, you can work out where the puck is. You can generally tell which player's got the puck as well. But it's such a fast-paced sport. It's the commentary, I think, can help with a lot of people. But I think the best solution I would have to anyone who's going, I struggle to see where the puck is, actually go and watch a game at your local rink with your local team. Best advice I can give. And then you can actually you start figuring out who's got the puck, who's the player in possession. It does take a little while. I know some people just can never get into it, but that's a regular criticism that new fans or new viewers to the sport have is who's the guy with the puck? Where is the thing? And this is where I think they could do better with the TV cameras and the TV angles and actually showing better replays. It could be better done. But with the advent of full HD and 4K, it's easier now to watch the sport. It's a bit more intense watching the sport. But at the same time, just look at footage on YouTube or on the internet. But at the same time, also actually go and watch a game. Go down and watch a game if you can. And if you can find some decent footage on the internet, you can sort of tell which player is in possession of the puck and where the puck is going with a pass and with a shot. You eventually you can train yourself to notice where it is. But the casual fan, the biggest complaint is I can't figure out who's in possession of the puck. That's the biggest complaint. It's not that the speed and the physicality and the fighting and the brawls and the skill and some of the banter and some of the humor in it of the sport. It's where's the black disc they're playing with? Where's the puck? I can't see it. And it can be an issue for some people, and that's a criticism that some fans or casual viewers have. But in the most part, it's a sport which a lot of people can get into very, very quickly. Some of the rules can be a bit confusing, and to explain them to a new fan, you have to start with the basics. I'm pretty lucky in the sense that a lot of my friends I've got a lot of friends who follow the sport as well. And once you actually meet some of the fans and get to know people, it's actually a pretty good community for, I would say, 95%. There is a minority who do tend to ruin it for people. You're going to find that in every sport, but it seems that minority is a lot less in ice hockey than, let's say, rugby union, rugby league, football, soccer, with that thuggish mentality minority. It seems to be a lot less in ice hockey, although there have been, unfortunately, some incidents in the last couple of years of racism and of some pretty shitty behaviour by fans that unfortunately have left a bad taste in the mouth of the majority. Social media can be a bit toxic, and this is where I think sport needs to do better. We've seen a lot this year about social media and the abuse of players and racism on social media and homophobia and a whole host of other things. So sports relationship with social media needs to be looked at as well, and that's something we could discuss on another video. Arsenal 2, Norwich 2. I think with Arsenal coming back from 2-1 down to draw the game, I think that's a positive. That's something they haven't been doing. when the game is tied, they've actually ended up losing the game, and when they've been ahead, they've thrown away leads in games. So I think that's a positive start for Lundberg. I think he'll be happy with the draw, and they didn't lose, and they showed some character to come back from 2-1 down to make it 2-all. I think that's a positive thing for Arsenal, but a long way to go. If they were 2-1 up under Emre, they would have lost 3-2. And Norwich are a solid side. They're a solid side. Just because they're newly promoted doesn't mean they're going to be whipping boys. I think that's a long gone story now with teams. I think Norwich are a very, very solid side. They've got goals in them. They've proven that they can score. And I think that was a good test for Lundberg as the interim manager. Getting that draw, I think, could be the springboard. Okay, right, we were losing the game. We only dropped 2 points. We didn't drop 3. I think that's important. I think that's the message I think he'll be bringing across is we didn't lose the game. We fought back from a losing position to tie it. Tight end-to-end game. We didn't lose. Something that we were doing before. I think I think they could use that as a springboard to go right. Next time we're in a tied game, we can kick on and get that third goal or that second goal or that first goal, whatever it may be, and win the game. The big test will be when they're leading 2-1 and they're under pressure. So while they've got one lesson out the way and they can use that as a positive, there are a couple of other situational lessons I think they've got to learn where they're drawing and they were ahead and they've been pegged back, or they're winning a game and there's 5-10 minutes left and this is where they've thrown games away. I think Lundberg probably will end up being the permanent manager. I think they'll give him the interim period over the next couple of weeks, and if results do improve and they go unbeaten in this period, picking up a few draws and a win here or there, I think that might actually be enough for the board to go, right, we'll go with Lundberg, let's say till the end of the season, and then assess in the summer. But I do think that they have to make a decision before the transfer window opens in January, on January the 1st. They have a month in which to find a replacement or give Lundberg the job for the rest of the season at least. Bring some players in the window, offload some of the players that aren't really fitting in. So Xhaka, for example, offload him and go from there, because this is the time of year where you don't want to sack your manager because you have very little time in which to bring a replacement in. Now, Tottenham have brought in Mourinho very, very quickly. And that was lined up before Pochettino was sacked. We're talking a couple of weeks before Mourinho was already lined up. Watford sacking Flores, again, they need to get a replacement in within the next couple of weeks. They can't go, here's an interim boss. I don't think Watford have that kind of time. They're in a much worse position than Arsenal are. I think Everton with Marco Silva will be next, and I think Solskjaer might be another manager on the block. Although what we've seen with Man United with their managers after Ferguson is they tend not to sack them till the end of the season. It's the end of the season when they tend to go. So Solskjaer might hang on for a while yet, and I do think having another transfer window, he can clear out some of the players that aren't really working and bring players in. I think that's what Solskjaer needs is that another transfer window. If by the end of the season they're still crap, he's out the door. I think Marco Silva could be out the door within the next few days. I can't see how Marco Silva can hold on with how Everton are going at the moment. Very similar to Arsenal. They're just throwing games away. They're not performing to their potential with the amount of money they've invested in their squad. But it'll be interesting. I think we have discussed a lot today about a lot of sports and a lot of mostly to do with sporting culture and TV rights deals yet again. And this is a regular theme, is the TV deals that sports have and the cost of sport for the fan. It's the last 10 years, the cost of sport has risen, yet people's wages in real terms haven't. In some cases, they've shrunk or they're below inflation. So, and I'm someone who works now in the public sector, which I didn't do before. Even though I'm technically working for a private company in the public sector, I'm still technically a council worker here in the UK. And I can tell you now, we've had to fight for a pay rise. And I can tell you now, budgeting with the way I've budgeted, my council tax and my water bill go out in 3 months' time. Well, I've got to pay my water bill now, but I pay every quarter. So I'm paying every 3 months. So some months I'll have more money than others. But I look at my wages and my rent, and I look at my other bills. I don't have a lot of money in which to play with for the rest of the month, in which to feed myself, get petrol costs for my motorbike to get to work, clothing costs. treating myself to a meal out with my mates, trip down the pub. I don't have a lot of money. I'm not on a lot of money. I'm reliant on doing overtime at time and a half or double time. I'm reliant on, and this is where I don't think people actually at the governing level of sport have realised that without fans, your true customer base, you have nothing. And I think what we're going to see is more stadiums with empty seats, more fans staying away, and the TV packages or the media rights packages have to change. They have to become more affordable. And this is where I think free to air TV and free streaming like YouTube have a part to play in bidding for rights, because at the moment, I just don't see it as sustainable. I don't see it as sustainable. And look at the managerial turnaround, because there's so much money in certain sports now. Managers are getting sacked all over the place. You've got players being overpaid massively, lack of transparency with agents' fees, a whole host of issues that are going unresolved and have gone unresolved for so long that at the end of the day, it's the fan that pays. But I'm going to leave that there. Arsenal drawing 2-2, I think, is a positive result for Lundberg, but also a positive result for Norwich, because they're the newly promoted club, established Premier League team, newly promoted team. I think both sides will take that result and take the positives out of that. Obviously, both sides want to win the game, and Norwich have lost the game from a winning position in the sense that they've drawn when they were winning. But Arsenal, they've come from behind to get this draw rather than being ahead and drawing or losing. So I think that's a positive in the character of the team. They can learn from it and take that next step. I think Lundberg, I think he's going to put his hat in the ring to become permanent manager. I think it will cost Arsenal less money to make him permanent manager than bring someone else in on a three-year deal. I think give Lundberg the job on an 18-month, so season and a half. I think that will be what they end up doing. Arsenal were very, very reluctant to sack Wenger when it was struggling, when the times got tough and the Wenger outposts were coming up, and then he repaid them with 3 more FA Cups and continued European qualification. In this case, they need some kind of stability, and if they were to get rid of Lundberg and bring someone else in, that means that's a third manager this season. So there we go. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all your questions. And if you missed the live stream, to watch from the beginning and you'll hear what we discussed. I'm not keen on the 100 format in cricket. Let's just say that I think it's a bad idea, because the TV companies, the media companies are holding the ECB by proverbial leather balls and basically calling the tune about what products they put out. So thank you very much, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.